Hey guys, just wanted to go over with you what we talked about in class today. We continued our thoughts on ecosystem ecology, and today we talked about a number of things that really run together quite a bit. They kind of overlap, and this idea of a limiting factor. So any abiotic, remember, which is non-living, or biotic, living factors that restrict the numbers, reproduction, or distribution of organisms. That's what a limiting factor is. So just for sake of time, we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and but you want to make sure you write these down in your notes. But there are two main types of limiting factors that we will discuss here. They are density independent and density dependent factors. So first of all, break down the words here. Density, of course, when we're talking about population ecology and ecosystem ecologies, density is going to talk about the number of individuals that are found in a given area. That's the density of that population. So I like to compare my different classes, like my second hour and my seventh hour, the density is very low. I have like about 6 or 7 kids in each hour. And then my density in my fifth hour is much bigger. I have about 27 kids. So there's a much higher density in that class. So then you get to the word dependent and independent. So dependent, think about density dependent means that that factor is going to depend upon the density of that population. The more dense it is, the higher that factor plays a role, okay, and things like that. So that's kind of what density dependent is. It definitely depends on the density of that population. Density independent is going to mean that it doesn't really matter how dense the population is. Populations could be like really high density or really low density. It's going to affect both populations the same. So it doesn't matter how dense the population is. So let's go in and look at those in more detail here. Let's go ahead. Density independent is again going to mean these are usually abiotic factors that are going to include a lot of natural phenomena. So things like, and some of the examples that we use here are going to be a lot of weather events like drought, flooding, extreme heat, extreme cold, and then you have your your tornadoes, your hurricanes, fires that occur in a wildfire that's going to occur. These are all density independent. Think about it. It doesn't matter how dense the population is. If there's a lot of individuals or not a lot of individuals, they're all going to be affected the same by the heat, or they're all going to be affected the same by flooding or drought or fire. So these are typically, again, abiotic, and they are going to affect both high density populations and low density populations. They affect them both pretty much equally. And then we talked about a density dependent factor are things that are going to really depend upon the density. They're oftentimes biotic factors. So the higher the density, the more of an effect they're going to play. Predation, disease, whether it's from bacteria or virus and things like that, the higher the density of that population, the more that disease is going to spread throughout the population. Parasites, kind of the same way, will spread a lot more quicker if there's a high density. And then competition for food, resources, mates, things like that are going to be density dependent factors. The higher the density, the higher the competition, the higher the disease, the higher the parasites and the predation. So those are limiting factors. Then we went and talked about this concept of a zone of tolerance. Okay, organisms can tolerate or survive within a certain range of a particular factor, but cannot survive if there's too much or too little of that factor. So they kind of like this range in the middle, and both extremes are usually not beneficial for the organism. So if you look at this graph here, you'll notice the preferred niche for these butterflies is this kind of middle of the road, this optimum range. When you get over to one end on the extremes, they don't do as well. So some examples here, we might think about the soil pH. If a soil is too acidic or too alkaline, some organisms won't like it, so they like that normal kind of middle of the road pH. Same way with maybe water too. You could look at the pH of water, some organisms. Temperature. It could be either too hot or too cold, and an organism may not like that, but it might like that more middle of the range. Think about it. You could look at water. Think about plants with water. Too little water, plants don't do well. Too much water, plants cannot. Some plants don't do well. Maybe sunlight. Too little sunlight, the plant doesn't grow well. Too much sunlight, it will dry it out maybe and cause it to die. So different organisms have this tolerance range that you need to be familiar with, and you can hopefully see how they kind of go hand in hand with these limiting factors. Another example we talked about with zones of tolerance today was like salinity in the water. So if you're at an ocean, especially around like the mouth of a river, maybe where there's fresh water flowing in, you'll have some organisms that are found in that region that will have a very wide tolerance of salinity. Like bull sharks, they can swim way up into freshwater rivers, and they can come out into the saltwater ocean. So they have this very wide range of tolerance, whereas a lot of other marine organisms don't have that. And then the next thing we talked about was this idea of a carrying capacity. The maximum number of individuals in a species that an environment can support for the long term. Or sometimes you might hear it, I might say it as the amount of resources in an environment that can support a certain number of a population of a species. It's kind of the way you want to look at that. Typically, when we look at a carrying capacity, we oftentimes will show that in the form of a graph. So if you look at this graph here, we have the population of deer over time. Now, in this graph, the carrying capacity was originally up here. It's kind of this dotted line is the carrying capacity. This is the number of the population size that this environment can support pretty easily. Now, if there's unrestricted deer population growth, meaning there's no predators, no hunting, things like that, that deer population can overshoot the carrying capacity. And if it does that, it will really deplete the resources, and then the individuals will start to die, and that population will begin to starve to death, and will plummet and will drop down and can drop well below the carrying capacity. And really, when they come back, that carrying capacity in that environment, because of all the damage done by the overgrazing and overeating of all the herd, it can lower that carrying capacity. And so it's good, that we talked about in class, how it's good oftentimes to have the predation there to keep that population in check. And in some places, it's good to have the hunting to keep the deer population or whatever population of the organisms that is in check. And that's all, well monitored by like the wildlife departments and things like that in each state. And it helps them to determine, they monitor the population and help to determine if, how many tags deer hunters can get each year, or maybe if they want to shorten the deer season or extend the deer hunting season a little bit. Because they're trying to keep that population at or near the carrying capacity in that region. So we talked a little bit also about how if you look at the human population growth, it looks something similar to this right now. We're in this, what we call a J-shaped curve. Now, ignore the rest of that because the human population has not done anything past that, but we're in this J-shaped curve. And another term that we like to use for a J-shaped curve is, that means that population is experiencing exponential growth, okay? Exponential growth. Think about an exponent in a number. When you increase an exponent by just one digit, you increase the overall value of that number immensely, right? It really increases the value of that number. So if you're experiencing exponential growth, that means you're growing really fast in a short amount of time. You might ask, where's the carrying capacity? What is the carrying capacity for Earth, for humans? And we really don't know. There's some scientists out there that speculate that maybe around 9 or 10 billion is the population size for our carrying capacity. I think we're at 7-something billion right now. Hopefully we don't overshoot that. If we overshoot it, then we could have problems like this deer population here, where there's not enough food and individuals can starve. So anyway, tomorrow I'll have a little activity, a little worksheet to do. I'll post it online. Feel free for those you virtual students to you can either print that out and hand do it. It's a graph, so it's kind of hard to do those on the Chromebook, I think. But if you can do it with Kami, feel free. If not, you can print it out, draw it out, take a photo, send me an upload, turn in that photo as your assignment. Or if you can't print it, just write your answers out, draw your graph as neat as possible, and take a picture of it and upload it, and that will work. So be looking for that tomorrow. See you guys later.